Here's a question which will help us to apply the head covering tradition in more specific ways. Here's a question. What are the spiritual acts where the head covering tradition applies? What are the spiritual acts where the head covering tradition applies? So let's begin obvious. Verse 4 to 5. Every man who prays or prophesies having down the head dishonors his head. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. So the head covering tradition would obviously apply when praying to God or prophesying. Now, there is another activity which I thought of which fits praying to God, and that is singing to God. So whether you sing to God alone or whether you're singing to God with other Christians, that is also prayer to God. I have 3 sets of evidence to share. First evidence, Paul treated prayer to God and singing to God as fundamentally similar. I say fundamentally similar because you can tell there's a slight difference. One has a melody and in a song, but in prayer, maybe it's just there's no melody to it. There's no beat, there's no instruments. So you can tell the difference between just a verbal prayer and a song with melody, with instruments. There are some differences, but they're fundamentally similar to Paul. In 1 Corinthians 14, verse 14 to 15, he said, "For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my mind is unfruitful." So we're talking about prayer here. What am I to do? I will pray with my spirit, but I will pray with my mind also. I will sing praise with my spirit, but I will sing with my mind also. Prayer to God, singing praise to God. To Paul, same. Fundamentally similar. Then there's the evidence from the book of Psalms also. The book of Psalms considers psalms, songs, and songs with instrumentation or not as prayers as well. Evidence number 2. The conclusion of Book 2 in Psalm 72 verse 20 reads this way: "The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended." The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended. This concludes Book 2 of the book of Psalms. So, Psalm 1 to 72, Book 1 and Book 2, they are considered prayers of David also. In other words, in that Book 1 to Book 2, or if you think this summary applies only to Book 2, whatever it is, there are many psalms inside in that collection, and yet the writer could say the prayers of David are ended. Psalms, prayers, fundamentally similar. Psalm 1 to 72 are also considered prayers. Evidence 3. Psalm 17, 86, 90, and 102 are explicitly introduced as prayers, and they are in the book of Psalms. So Psalm 17 is introduced in this way: a prayer of David. Psalm 86, a prayer of David. Psalm 90, a prayer of Moses, the man of God. Psalm 102, a prayer of one afflicted when he is faint and pours out his complaint before the Lord. You can see from these 4 prayers, they are explicitly introduced as, these 4 Psalms are explicitly introduced as prayers, and they are in the book of Psalms. So Psalms with instrumentation or not, and prayers to God, they were all collected into the book of Psalms without any hint that they are fundamentally different. The only differences lay in whether there was melody or whether there was instrumentation. Yet the book of Psalms treats psalms, songs, prayers as fundamentally similar in that they all verbally address God. The melodies and the instrumentation of psalms do not make singing a psalm or a song anything more or anything less than a prayer to God. Thus, singing to God is a prayer to God. So, the head covering tradition applies when praying to God, singing to God, or prophesying. However, since there are no explicit statements requiring the head covering tradition to apply to activities such as the act of listening to a sermon, or the act of eating the bread and drinking the wine when you participate in the Lord's Supper, there's no explicit statement that requires the head covering traditions to apply during such acts. And so I conclude the head covering tradition does not apply in these activities. But say at some point when you're listening to a sermon, if you want to pray by yourself, well, it would seem like this is the point where you will want to apply the head covering tradition. Or at some point in participating in the Lord's Supper, if there is praying or if there's singing involved, perhaps in a response song, then apply the head covering tradition, even if that is considered formally part of the Lord's Supper, you know. So don't let the title of that portion of your worship program prevent you from thinking what is the fundamental activity going on at that particular moment. If it is a prayer to God, or in that case, or maybe it's a song to God, then apply the head covering tradition. If it's time for a prophecy to be shared, then well, do apply the head covering tradition. Any other times, since there are no explicit statements requiring it, then we do not need to apply the head covering tradition to those other activities.